has some of the most boring director's commentary. Like, it's super informative, but he's so dry.
You know what, the one thing I will say I appreciate about him, though, is that Fincher always has so many DVD extras. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that man puts together a DVD.
Except for Alien 3.
Well, DVDs didn't really exist back then, but I'll let that point slide.
And we don't even count that as a Fincher film.
Yeah, I thought you were going to be like, we don't even count that as a film.
I was shocked to just go online and find out there's a lot of people on the internet that really like Alien 3. I don't get it.
There's dozens.
There's dozens of us. Quick digression. Are we excited for Alien Romulus?
I mean, we're going to cover it on the podcast.
I like what I read about it, and where it sits in the timeline makes me happier that it's not just another Prometheus tie-in.
Crazy sequel. Yeah, I agree. And dude, the fact it's Fede Alvarez, that guy's a legit psycho. So yeah, I'm excited for him.
The best I'm hoping for with it is that it's a really good Alien tribute band, because the trailer makes it look like that's what it is. Which
no, the trailer, I'm curious to see if they get a little creative with like some of the deaths, and I don't know what else they could do at this point.
There's guaranteed not a chest burster, but I'm talking a whole xenomorph is going to come right out of somebody's body. I'm calling it right now.
It's like someone, like a xenomorph will like flex and then the body will just come off.
Dude, honestly, have you seen his Evil Dead movie?
No. The new one.
I'm like, Pat, I
don't. It's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, like
I have no idea who he is before I found out he was making this.
Don't Breathe, Evil Dead, and he also produced what was it, Evil Dead Rise? He didn't direct that. It's from the state. No, he didn't direct that. But Evil Dead with 2013.
Didn't he work on video games?
Yeah, he did a lot of that in like the early 2000s too. Don't Breathe is also this guy. Let's just say he knows how to like write a kill, make a kill, make you want to throw up looking at the kill.
Yep.
Well,
oh my God! Don't Breathe. That movie's crazy.
It's the Alien franchise has set a pretty low bar. So
speaking of movies that don't have a lot of kills but makes you want to die.
Yeah, let's begin here. This is Why Wasn't It Better? And I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And your co-host, Anton Paras here.
And a return guest that everyone should be familiar with at this point, Garret Ohringer. Welcome back, Garret.
Thank you. It's nice to see you both. It's nice to hear you both and be with you both. Honestly, at this point, I feel like I shouldn't even wait for you guys to introduce me. I should just go right in and just assume.
I paused to allow that to you. And all right, the next time you're on, feel free to just jump in.
Oh, I'm just straight up going to hijack it. It's going to be my podcast now. Like,
perfect. Just kickstart it. Like, you're more than comfortable just in the host chair.
Exactly.
Plus, like, we were, listeners, fun behind the scenes fact, Garret and I grabbed lunch recently, like in person.
It's crazy. Anton's wearing glasses now to show the passage of time. He looks so smart, so astute, and just so weathered in a good way now.
I always wear glasses.
It's true. He does always wear glasses. But again, this is a podcast. People can't see you, Anton. So you got to
That's fair.
Them, yeah?
That's fair.
Although we are recording video now, maybe in the future people will see this.
By the way, both your glasses look amazing. I wish I was wearing my glasses. I have contacts in like a loser.
Thank you.
I promise I'm not ashamed of my glasses.
Well, a real quick bit of admin before we get into this. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever platform, please go ahead and press that follow button or drop us a 5-star review or both. Don't forget, we're also active on the big social media spots, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And if you're really loving the show, you can support us directly by joining our Patreon. So whether you're on your daily commute, relaxing at home, or diving into a nostalgia trip, make Why Wasn't It Better your ultimate podcast companion.
That was really well said, by the way.
Yeah.
I just want to say that was just beautifully said, rehearsed.
We're gonna have to take that and then add it to every single short that we have, whether it's on our YouTube or Instagram, because we want to make sure that folks are not only enjoying those shorts, but also following and liking and listening on all our platforms, right?
Exactly. Anton and I have a lot more lunches to go to, so please help pay for them. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yes, keep funding our lunches.
Keep funding lunch. Yes, exactly.
The more the funding, the better the lunch.
Exactly.
So we're now into season 6, and it's spooky season, and we decided to cover not just what you would call traditional horror movies. Anton and I recently recorded an episode on Fatal Attraction, which is sometimes categorized as a horror movie, sometimes not.
Mhm.
And today's film, I don't think it's officially a horror movie. It's 2007's Zodiac, and yet I think it's a perfect film to cover for October.
Excited about this one. Listeners should probably know at this point, I'm a big Bay Area guy. I live in the Bay Area. I love films about San Francisco and especially the history around it. And no doubt about it, Zodiac is tied to the history of the Bay Area. So I'm excited for us to dig in.
Anton, does this rank highly for you in terms of San Francisco movies?
Oh, yeah. We're going to go into it. But the attention to detail to get the time right is amazing. And not only whether it was the costuming, the effects that they would put into place, but also just the on-set location. Like, it's all just so amazing, the amount of detail they put in this film.
And of course, we're big David Fincher fans on this podcast, and he is, of course, from the Bay Area. I forget which town he grew up in. Maybe it was San Francisco proper. I'm not really sure, but I know he's from that area. And his attention to detail, which was already famous before this film, was only enhanced by it.
Yeah, there's so many instances watching the film where it keeps coming back to me like, oh, I remember being there. And funny enough, I mentioned it before the recording. The old neighborhood I lived in was also featured in the film as well. So a lot of fun snippets, a lot of great behind the scenes, and we're going to dig into all of that in this very, very fun film.
Anton, it's very interesting that you know so much about the behind the scenes of this movie, and the Zodiac Killer hasn't been found yet. Is there something you'd like to tell the listeners?
That there are 9 other people that might also fit the description, but my good alibi is that I wasn't around in the 1960s.
All right, I think your alibi checks out, being given the fact you were not born yet. So we'll allow it. We'll scratch you from the suspect list.
All right.
So in the late 1960s and early 1970s, fear grips the city of San Francisco as a serial killer called the Zodiac stalks its residents. Investigators and reporters become obsessed with learning the killer's identity and bringing him to justice. Meanwhile, Zodiac claims victim after victim and taunts the authorities with cryptic messages, ciphers, and menacing phone calls. Zodiac was released on March 2nd, 2007 by Paramount Pictures and Warner Brothers, directed by David Fincher, screenplay by James Vanderbilt, based on Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked by Robert Graysmith, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, Robert Downey Jr., Anthony Edwards, Chloe Sevigny, Elias Koteas, Donald Logue, Brian Cox, and John Carroll Lynch. The budget was $65 million. That is $98 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was only $84 million. That's $124 million adjusted for inflation. This was a bomb. Unfortunately, this movie made no money.
Way to ruin it, audiences.
I know.
Including yourself, who didn't see it.
As the guest for today, Garrett.
Yes.
Why did you get excited when I offered you this film?
So David Fincher, unsurprisingly, is one of my favorite directors too. Any movie he does is just like an immediate, at least I should say now is an immediate be there opening weekend. I cannot say when I was 16 years old and this movie was released, I was rushing to movie theaters to see this. My stupid high school brain was probably too excited to see like Transformers or like Wild Hogs or some other drivel that came out in 2007 too. But I will say Fincher's themes of just obsession are really on fire in this movie too. I think Zodiac can easily be distilled into basically how obsession breaks a man, and that obsession is trying to find basically something that can't be found, which is the Zodiac Killer too. And I just think Fincher deals with themes of obsession, whether it's movies like, honestly, Seven itself, The Killer, Mank, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Hell's Social Network. Honestly, just all really kind of drives in on those themes as well. So when I was invited to talk about Zodiac, which having revisited many times in my older years of life, aka my early 30s, I was more than happy to talk about this absolute masterpiece that I regret not having seen sooner when it came out originally.
With you 100% on Fincher. Anything he does, I'm immediately interested. And then you have the subject matter. Just by itself, the legend of the Zodiac Killer, that's a fascinating one. One of, if not the most famous unsolved murder cases in American history. I would say the American version of Jack the Ripper. Is that safe to say?
Very, very interesting case because also the confirmed volume of kills by the Zodiac Killer, less than some of the also notorious serial killers in U.S. history, but this one really gripped the nation.
Well, it's fair to say he kind of like started the cultural zeitgeist of just the dark and awful 70s and serial killers in general in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the number of victims was the same as Jack the Ripper, right? I think 5 confirmed.
5 confirmed and
Which,
however many, yeah.
To your point, Anton, there's been far more what you would call prolific serial killers in American history. But the fact that this went unsolved and the fact that he was writing the letters to the papers and the police, it had such an impact on American culture. And it's really lasted.
Yeah, very, very notorious and, again, tied very deeply to the history of San Francisco and the Bay Area.
Right. This movie, I mentioned the box office. It made no money. I don't really know many people that actually saw it in theaters when it came out. I did not. I saw it in what you would call a second run theater at college. My college, there was a theater on campus that I guess counted as a second run theater. They would show films that came out before they came out on DVD. I don't even know if second run theaters exist anymore. Probably not. But I saw it. I really liked it. But probably like a lot of people, it grew on me over the years. The more I saw it, the more I liked it. And I wanted to cover this as well as you did, Anton, since we started the podcast, because even though it's considered one of the best films of its era, and even though it did really well critically, made no money at the box office, it might be the best movie ever not nominated for an Academy Award along with Heat. The fact that this was completely ignored by the Academy Awards always baffled me.
One thing I do want to say, this movie came out when? March 2007.
Yeah.
Now March is less of kind of a dumping grounds, but I think really back then, traditional Hollywood, it was like January through March, and then August was kind of your dumping grounds for films that won't be commercially or critically successful. I made a Wild Hogs reference before, but the movie I was actually probably seeing in theaters at this time was like Ghost Rider, or another terrible movie about numbers and patterns, The Number 23 with Jim Carrey. But the point that I'm trying to say is, like, I'm not giving good competition too. And as we know with Academy voters, the further away you are from December and November, the further away your chances are for kind of getting the votes, especially in kind of that era. So I think when it was released, did not help its chances, obviously commercially, but also critically, to your point. I know that was a slight digression, but
no, you're right. It's a really good point, and we'll expand on that later. I think that's still mostly true to some degree. There's obviously exceptions like Oppenheimer, and historically there's been exceptions to that. But I think even so, very much today, if you want the film to be considered for awards, namely the Oscars, it's November, December.
I agree. Very conventional wisdom.
2007, you mentioned some bad ones there, Garrett, but there were some great ones. Really great year for films. There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, Michael Clayton, Ratatouille, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, 300, Eastern Promises, Atonement, Charlie Wilson's War, 3:10 to Yuma, The Kite Runner, Transformers, The Bourne Ultimatum, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, just to name a few.
Well,
Sweeney Todd in there as well.
Superbad, best comedy of the 2000s.
You named a lot of really good films. I have a list of really bad films from 2007.
There's some bad ones.
Norbit, Amazing Grace, Reno 911, Miami.
Whoa. Hold on. Nope, I'm getting a live interruption.
The Hills Have Eyes Too.
No, I'm not letting you move past Reno 911. Reno 911 is fantastic. How dare you besmirch that movie? I love it. My wife and I just rewatched it last week and we were laughing the entire time. Then again, I know it's entirely subjective, but I am going to fight for Reno 911 on this podcast.
I'll say it again. Norbit.
All right,
Note that I included Transformers in my list. Don't think it's a terrible movie, the first one.
It's good.
It's not bad.
It's good. It's fine.
Yeah. The sequels, notwithstanding.
Sorry, Anton. Where were you?
Do you have more bad movies, Anton?
Do you have more bad movies?
There were a lot of bad movies. Disturbia?
I didn't hate it.
Yeah.
Watch Rear Window. Watch Rear Window instead.
I was going to say just watch Rear Window.
Yeah.
Back to David Fincher. Interesting point in his career. He had not done a film in 5 years prior to this, which I didn't realize that. The last one he had done prior to this was Panic Room. And at the time, he was seen to be in somewhat of a decline, which is obviously nonsense because Panic Room's an awesome movie. And I won't hear any other arguments.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Not arguing. Not arguing.
I've often heard that though. Of like, oh, that's a bad Fincher movie. It's like, I don't think it
You want
is.
to know what it is? I think a lot of people conflate bad with like minor. Like you can definitely say Panic Room is like a minor Fincher movie, if that makes sense. Like people don't really think about it, but it is a good, effective thriller that's
It's an
got
awesome
some
movie.
sick, slick camera work and CGI in it.
Well, so speaking of just Fincher movies in general, this is actually the official second San Francisco Fincher movie.
Correct.
Garrett, do you remember the first one?
Is it the game?
The Game.
The game is San Francisco.
I love that movie
Also,
so much.
when some people in my life, who I will not name because I will not put them on blast on the podcast, they don't like the game. I think the game is awesome. I love the twist at the end. It's fine. It's great.
I love the game.
It's so much fun.
It's so rewatchable.
Now, if you want to poop on a movie, we can poop on Benjamin Button. But sorry if I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, that one, not one of my favorites. I didn't see Mank either. I haven't seen it.
I also
fun.
haven't seen Mank.
It's
And
good. I like it a lot.
we talked about The Killer on that surprise episode.
Which is
that is a good
fine.
movie.
Good movie. Pretty
Yeah.
good.
Oh, I like
I'll see it again.
Anton,
I wanted
have
to
a
watch
good-
John Woo's The Killer, but
Anton, I got a good story for you about The Killer. The day we both got let go from our jobs, that's for all the listeners out there. Instead of going to any like offboarding interview or anything like that, I just went straight to the movies and saw The Killer at like 11:30 on a Tuesday, and then had a couple beers during it too. And I don't know what that says about me. I promise I am not retaliating or doing anything that's going to put me on a list like a potential Zodiac killer. But let me just say that was a real devil may care and just cold-hearted attitude of mine that kind of took into full effect, and Fincher just hit me right in the spot where I needed to get hit with The Killer.
I don't think there's anything wrong with what you just said.
we all
No.
need a cathartic experience.
Right, it was very cathartic to see a cold man who is just full of precision and no emotion. So I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I'm a sociopath, but anyway, listeners, that's for you to decide.
We don't think that of you. Garrett.
No, we don't. But we're going to talk about some sociopathic tendencies that were on screen in Zodiac. So
Yeah. So the production history of Zodiac. The film screenplay was largely
just we're going to let that one.
It's an inside joke, but there's a certain filmmaker who we've talked about on this podcast who pronounces things just in strange ways. And I often wonder, how would he pronounce this? How would he
Zodiac.
pronounce that? I'm talking about Irvin Kershner.
Yeah, you're not wrong, Pat.
No.
He would say Zodiac.
Zodiac. The Zodiac Killer.
The Zodiac, yeah. He sounds like he's from Jersey or something.
He's from Philly.
I know. Oh, actually, there you go.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah. Anyway, back to Zodiac. The screenplay was largely based on the writings of Robert Graysmith, who is, of course, played by Jake Gyllenhaal in the film. The origins for a film about the Zodiac Killer date back to 1997. Graysmith first sold the film rights to his true crime book, Zodiac, to screenwriter Shane Salerno, with whom he had established a friendship. Salerno managed to make a deal with Ricardo Mestres of Great Oaks Entertainment to co-produce and write the film for Touchstone Pictures. That would have been Disney at the time. Now, according to Stuart Hazeldine, who was pitched to rewrite it, the script would have been about the Zodiac Killer resurfacing in Los Angeles. That sounds ridiculous. I don't know how that possibly makes sense, but that's what the research tells us.
Does that not sound like every slasher movie that came out in the year 2005?
Probably.
Do you know what I mean? Just like the terrible premises of like that killer we thought was dead is coming back to haunt us, and no nuances there, and they're just killing people in awful ways. And it has a 17 on Rotten Tomatoes.
I'm thinking Freddy versus Jason for whatever reason.
No, that's exactly what I mean. And probably Sanaa Lathan would star in this film for some reason.
New Line Cinema presents.
James Vanderbilt had read Graysmith's book in high school, and years later the two met, and Vanderbilt became fascinated with the story and dedicated himself to adapting it into a script. Having had past experiences where his scripts had their endings changed without his consent, Vanderbilt was determined to maintain more control on this one. He pitched his adaptation of Zodiac to Mike Medavoy and Bradley Fisher from Phoenix Pictures. Medavoy has popped up on this podcast before, Anton. Way back when we covered that terrible 1978 animated version of The Lord of the Rings. Best forgotten.
Yeah.
Graysmith met Fisher and Vanderbilt at the premiere of Paul Schrader's film Autofocus, based on his 1991 book about the life and death of actor Bob Crane. Now, David Fincher was their first choice to direct based on his work on Seven, no coincidence. Originally, Fincher was going to direct an adaptation of James Ellroy's novel The Black Dahlia, envisioning a 5-hour miniseries. This film would end up being made by Brian De Palma in 2006.
That one didn't work out.
Never saw it.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Maybe, if we cover it. Yeah, I'm not the biggest De Palma fan. According to Fincher, he was drawn to the Zodiac story because he spent much of his childhood in San Anselmo in Marin County, there you go, during the initial murders, and he thought the killer was, quote, the ultimate boogeyman, end quote. He was also drawn to the unresolved ending of Vanderbilt's screenplay because it felt true to real life, as cases were not always solved.
He told Vanderbilt that he wanted the screenplay rewritten with research done from the original police reports. Fincher found that there was much speculation and hearsay, and therefore wanted to interview people who were directly involved in the case in person to see if their stories were believable. He did this because he felt a burden of responsibility in making a film that convicted someone posthumously. Fincher, Fisher, and Vanderbilt spent about 18 months interviewing witnesses, family members of suspects, retired and current investigators, the two surviving victims, and the mayors of San Francisco and Vallejo. They went as far as hiring a forensic linguistics expert to analyze the Zodiac's letters. Unlike document examiners in the 1970s, he focused on the language of the Zodiac and how he formed his sentences in terms of structure and spelling. When David Toshi met Fincher, Fisher, and Vanderbilt, Fincher told him he was not going to make another Dirty Harry, which was loosely based on the Zodiac case. Toshi was impressed with their knowledge of the case and realized that he had learned from them. The Zodiac's surviving victims, Mike Magow and Brian Hartnell, were consultants on the film. Fincher and Fisher first approached MGM about financing the film, but talks fell through because the studio wanted the running time fixed at 2 hours and 15 minutes. Warner Brothers and Paramount agreed to share the production costs and were more flexible about the running time. The executives were concerned about the large amount of dialogue, lack of action scenes, and inconclusive ending. All the President's Men was a template for Zodiac, as Fincher felt that it was also, quote, the story of a reporter determined to get the story at any cost, end quote. No coincidence that the score was also composed by David Shire. One of Fincher's earliest conversations on the film's casting was with Jennifer Aniston. She talked about actors she enjoyed working with, and she mentioned they were Gyllenhaal and Mark Ruffalo. Fincher was already considering Gyllenhaal for the role of Robert Graysmith because, according to him, quote, I really liked him in Donnie Darko, and I thought, he's an interesting double-sided coin. He can do that naive thing, but he can also do Possessed, end quote. At first, Mark Ruffalo was not interested in the project, but Fincher wanted him to play David Toshi, but Fincher convinced him to take the role. Originally, Gary Oldman was to play Melvin Bell, but they couldn't get the makeup appliances to work, and so the role went to Brian Cox. Principal photography began on September 12, 2005. The filmmakers shot for 5 weeks in the Bay Area and the rest of the time in Los Angeles, bringing the film in under budget, wrapping in February 2006. The film took 115 days to shoot. Almost the entire film was shot with a digital Thomas Viper film stream camera. Contrary to popular belief, it was not shot 100% digitally. Parts of the stabbing scene at Lake Berryessa were shot using high-speed film. Fincher and director of photography Harry Savides did not want to repeat the look of Seven. Their approach to Zodiac was to create a look mundane enough that audiences would accept that what they were watching was the truth. Some of the cast was not happy with Fincher's exacting ways and perfectionism. Some scenes required upward of 70 takes. Gyllenhaal was frustrated by the director's methods and commented in an interview, quote, you get a take, 5 takes, 10 takes, some places 90 takes. But there is a stopping point. There's a point at which you go, that's what we have to work with. But we would reshoot things. So there came a point where I would say, well, what do I do? Where's the risk? End quote. Robert Downey Jr. said, quote, I just decided aside from several times I wanted to garrote him, that I was going to give him what he wanted. I think I'm a perfect person to work with him, or to work for him, because I understand gulags, end quote. Fincher responded to this saying, quote, if an actor is going to let the role come to them, they can't resent the fact that I'm willing to wait as long as that takes. You know, the first day of production in San Francisco, and we shot 50 takes of Mark and Jake, and it's the 56th take that's in the movie, end quote. Digital Domain handled most of the film's 200 plus visual effect shots, and the film did extremely well with critics, with a 90% Rotten Tomatoes score. And that is the production for Zodiac. And with that, we're going to, of course, dive into the reasons of why this film wasn't better. But before that, we will take a commercial break.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. Getting into why wasn't it better? We should probably start by saying this. We all love this film. We're going to be giving it a very high rating.
Agreed.
I think it's going to be more along the lines, kind of like when we did The Insider. It's like, why did this film fail so badly at the box office? And Garrett, you were alluding to this earlier. The first reason I have here is marketing. It is unorthodox. This is just not a box office friendly film.
This is not a box office friendly anything, too.
No.
And of course, when it's made by someone like David Fincher, who wants to get everything so precise and so exact, it's not going to be done with a small budget that can easily recoup its losses. Like, I'm sure you'll get into all the digital effects created, but when you're visually recreating San Francisco throughout the years, adding hair to Jake Gyllenhaal's hands to basically make him look older, it's going to run you up a few costs, probably delay some production, and probably rankle some of your higher ups.
The original cut ran 3 hours and 8 minutes. It was supposed to be released in time for Academy Award consideration. This would have been late 2006, but Paramount felt that the film was too long. They asked Fincher to make changes. Now, contractually, he had final cut, and once he reached a length that he felt was right, he refused to make any further cuts. And I think the final runtime is like 237, 240.
242.
Right around there.
But isn't this the same thing he did with Social Network? They were like, you can't do this under 2 hours, and basically read it for the studio executives and was like, see, I can't get it done in under 2 hours, basically. It's the same reason. Why does everyone talk so fast? Instead of cutting it movie down, just make everyone read a little bit faster in the line readings. So that's how Fincher cuts time, not by editing, but by making people go faster.
Whenever I think of his films, though, I think of the most crisp editing I've ever seen.
Yes.
Like when you think about something like even a quote unquote like throwaway film like Panic Room that has some of the tightest editing you'll find in any thriller.
It's not even just the editing too. It's even just like simple coverage shots to aerial shots. A great example too, when we're following one of the supposed Zodiac killers of the cabbie to in Presidio Heights, just basically following the cab from that kind of bird's eye view and basically making turns with the camera that is physically impossible just to get this kind of establishing shot too, for lack of better words. Who else would do that besides David Fincher? Nobody.
You're right. Completely and physically impossible, and yet he does it in a way where it doesn't feel unnatural.
Right. And everything feels, what's the word I'm looking for, like a part of the film. Nothing feels extra or gratuitous, I think is maybe the word I'm better looking for.
Yeah, no, I love that point that you made there. I totally agree around every scene that we see. It's on purpose. We see a following shot. Everything that we're seeing on the screen, it's part of the story. It's moving along. It's building the escalation and the tension. So while we do get a lengthy runtime, no scene is a waste, which sometimes we get a lot of fluff in even shorter films.
I wonder how much he actually fought the studio over the runtime, because this had a post-production of 11 months. That's quite a bit.
That is such a long post-production too. You could film another movie if you were anybody but David Fincher during that time.
And then I read on the Wikipedia article, for Academy Awards contention, Paramount distributed the Director's Cut DVD to the Producers Guild of America, the Writers Guild, and the Screen Actors Guild instead of the official release version. It was the first time the studio had done this. So it's like they apparently put some kind of effort into making it available for awards consideration. But Garrett, you nailed this earlier. It's like, why release it in March then?
Do you think, and this is a slight digression but related to this point, do you think David Fincher is the king of directors where when a movie comes out, both the studio and the audience reject it? And we're like, that's stupid. Why would I want to watch that? And we don't see it and it fades into the ether. And then 6 months, 6 years, however longer later, we're like, yeah, that movie's a masterpiece and it's criminally underrated. I feel like that happens to David Fincher's movies more than any other director that like can immediately come to mind.
I think you're onto something there because you even think about like the cultural powerhouse that Fight Club is. That movie did not do well at the box office. I don't think it even did well critically when it came out. I think it became a cult classic.
No, it was a real, what is this? And I think the only one that really kind of managed to kind of captures audiences in real time was Social Network, because let's be honest, it's quasi-related. I would call it like a second cousin once removed to Zodiac, but it also is kind of like a quote-unquote serial killer whose downfall we want to see and can easily identify. So I can see how that resonates with the audience, more the prescience of it. But, you know, Fincher's movies, everyone says, oh, it's too cold, it's too long, the pacing's off, there's so many extra digital shots, why is that? And then 6 months later, we're like, yeah, that's the greatest film that was ever made. Why didn't we watch it in theaters? I feel like that just happens with David Fincher the most.
I think also, I mean, when we look at what it was up against at the time, it was films that, okay, it made sense at the time why those films did really well. I mean, 300, that was a huge film in 2007. If you're going up against that in March 2007, it'll be hard to get some market share.
I know, it is crazy that, yes, 300 wipes out the whole box office a week later, but the fact that freaking Wild Hogs makes $40 million. Is
that what Travolta?
Yeah, Travolta.
It was Travolta,
William H. Macy,
Tim Allen,
and Martin Lawrence.
Yep,
it was a big hit, right?
It was a big hit.
Pat, guess the worldwide gross for Wild Hogs right now.
250 million.
Holy moly, 254. Good guess.
Seriously?
Yeah, great
that is still way too much.
I did know that film was a hit, but wow, that's
170 domestic.
I thought it was hilarious that they actually pissed off a real motorcycle club enough that they had to like publicly apologize.
Isn't it sad how much more excited we are talking about the folly of Wild Hogs than like the failure almost of Zodiac in terms of critical and commercial success? We're getting off track, and I'm sorry for bringing us there, but I think listeners and you both know I love digressions.
We love your digressions. Otherwise, we wouldn't keep inviting you back.
Exactly,
it's true,
man.
because it also kind of brings up a really great point around public perception of what's bright and shiny may not always be what's critically like art. And it's always kind of takes another look and being able to unearth and really look at what's been great to just finally put it on that pedestal it deserves. So we've seen it more and more, and this is just another really good example of that.
In a 2016 critics poll conducted by the BBC, Zodiac was voted the 12th greatest film of the 21st century.
You guys know what was number 11?
Wild Hogs.
Wild Hogs.
Pat, what was number 1 on the list?
I don't even know.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to guess Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, probably.
The 21st century?
Oh, 21st?
Oh, 21st century.
If the answer's not Mad Max Fury Road, then I don't want to read the list.
Probably should have looked up the whole list, but I didn't.
Anyhow.
I would put Zodiac somewhere up there on the list. I mean, and yet, for all the critical praise that this film gets, I still somehow think it's weirdly underrated.
I think that's true because, again, I think we talk about it in such a retrospective lens, kind of how I was talking about before. We're saying, how did we not see this when this first came out? Or, wow, Fincher has so many great hallmarks and so many camera movements, or just so many things that he does digitally that we didn't pay attention to. So it's kind of like we're just having like a latent appreciation for almost like what is more common or, you know, kind of adopted more by filmmakers today too. So it's kind of spoken about more with like historical reverence, if anything.
Yeah.
That's at least how I've approached it, I think, in conversation mostly.
I think the biggest thing, if you're trying to talk someone into watching this, right, it's the marketing problem, right? That the title of the first reason of why wasn't it better here is on the discussion, right? There's no meaningful resolution. That turns a lot of people off. It has no real ending. It just kind of peters out, and the characters just disappear one by one. Like Downey just falls out of the movie. Ruffalo just falls out of the movie. That's pretty unorthodox for a film, and I think this film had almost no chance of being a box office success just based on that alone. I know people that have seen this and were very put off by that. They're like, I don't know what happened in the second half. It just kind of peters out.
I think I know what you're kind of trying to get at over here too, if I'm not mistaken. It's like you're kind of talking how there's really no narrative structure almost of this movie. It's not a traditional 3-act movie by
Yeah.
any means. There's no
No.
hero's journey that we're going on. And to your point, the movie really does bounce around and there is no main character. In the beginning, it's Robert Downey Jr.'s movie. Gyllenhaal is just awkwardly off to the sidelines trying to get in. Then it becomes Ruffalo's movie. And then towards the end, the last 40 minutes, is just Jake Gyllenhaal basically going crazy, pretty much too. And it really just shows how obsession wrecks these three characters. But then again, that isn't necessarily the structure of the film itself. So it's hard to kind of follow. And then, Pat, I think to your point, can be a little kind of, bittersweet with the ending. Obviously, there's no resolution, or just meandering almost. Like, what was this all for? Just
No closure. There's no closure.
There's no closure at all. But that's also, I think, its greatest strength, personally.
Yeah, and I mean, this is all very much like a retrospective. Let's even kind of think of it within the context of the trailer at the time it released. That kind of paces the film much more quickly. It feels a bit more like a traditional thriller with a more traditional story structure, and also really does feature Mark Ruffalo's god-awful tie that he had in the film. But at the same time, if you look at the equation, it makes sense. Unconventional, extremely long film that is a bit more big budget art house didn't do well at the box office. Like, that adds up to me.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mark Ruffalo, sorry, I just want to ask, which Mark Ruffalo cop do you like better? This one or Collateral? Mark Ruffalo
is he Hispanic in Collateral?
Yeah, he's like Hispanic. He's got like the slick back hair and just like that awful goatee.
Yeah, I always wondered that about Collateral. I was like, is his character supposed to be Hispanic or is he undercover as a Hispanic?
He's making a choice as an actor.
Which San Francisco Mark Ruffalo do you prefer better? Zodiac Mark Ruffalo or Just Like Heaven Mark Ruffalo?
Man, Just Like Heaven Mark Ruffalo rules.
Have you seen that film in a while, guys? Do you remember this film?
It's been a while.
I saw that in high school in the theaters with a girl because I wanted to make out with her. Not even joking.
And
success.
She looked like Reese Witherspoon.
Thanks for the reminder, Anton.
Okay.
And she looked just like Reese Witherspoon.
Ugh, I wish. No offense to former classmate of mine in high school.
It's no insult.
Anyone that went to go watch movies with Garrett back in high school, they're like, did he try to make out with me?
Answer is probably yes.
You didn't take anyone to Zodiac, did you?
No, can't say I did. Remember, I was seeing Ghost Rider.
Oh, right. Yeah, you were a big Nicolas Cage fan.
I'm not even joking. I remember. Okay, here's another good little digression here. I remember I was going to the movies. My mom took me. She's like, all right, what do you want to see? Zodiac was out. And I was like, no, that looks scary. I didn't like horror movies back then. Yeah. Clearly, the marketing did a number on me. I was like, let's go see Ghost Rider. After that, my mom looked at me. She's like, I'm not letting you fucking pick a movie for the next year. This was so, like, I don't even remember what she said, but she was
Don't blame her.
Well,
she was actively mad and cursing at me.
No, after the movie, she like looked you in the eyes and gave you the same penance stare that Ghost Rider does.
Yeah, she basically gave me the penance stare over there. She gave me the look that the man does when he gives it to Jake Gyllenhaal in the basement in Zodiac, basically. He's like,
Roger Rabbit?
Yeah, Roger Rabbit, exactly. Yep. His name was escaping me, and I was like, which movie was it? Roger Rabbit. Yeah, it basically gives me a look of like, my mom basically gave me a look of, I'm going to probably kill you now. Sorry.
Before we move on to the next reason, they're very different films, but I wanted to point this out, how in the second half, this film kind of peters out. Very much reminded me of Steven Spielberg's Munich.
Didn't that end on a sex scene?
It was one of the last scenes.
Yeah.
Munich is for sure a movie. This is going to sound awful. I also remember going on a date to see Munich in theaters. And as a Jewish person, that is not a great date to go see in theaters. But
no, that's a terrible film to see on a date.
I wasn't smart in 2005. I'm a different kind of dumb now, but I'm smarter than that.
We're going to cover Munich eventually.
I'll just say now, I remember it was my turn to pick a movie at the library to watch for the family.
And you went with Munich?
I went with Munich.
This is a sidebar. Munich is the only film that I've ever seen in the theater where the theater employee was trying to talk us out of seeing it, I believe for political reasons.
Oh.
When we were buying the tickets, the lady behind the counter was like, oh, you're going to see Munich? And we were like, yeah. She's like, are you sure? And we were like, yeah. And she's like, well, this movie's really bad, so if you want your money back, just come out and we'll refund you. We were like,
That's weird.
okay. I've never had anyone offer that me before, but thanks.
Anyway, so to your point, yeah, the movie does kind of turn into a totally different movie once it becomes Jake Gyllenhaal's movie in the last 40 minutes or so. There's got to be a name for that trope. Like when you think a movie's done, but it's still got like another half hour to an hour left in the tank.
There's got to be a name for it. I think it just doesn't follow the traditional.
Yeah, the never-ending story.
Well, speaking of Jake Gyllenhaal, he's going to be the subject of our next reason, and along with the rest of the cast. This is never included as one of his better performances, but I really like him in this.
I think he should have been nominated for this role. I feel like the way that he shows obsession, like Garret, I feel like you really hit the nose on the head of like Fincher really loving to kind of capture that in his films. I think Gyllenhaal really transformed in this film.
He really had kind of a great little tear right there in the mid 2000s when he was kind of transitioning out of the teenage, October Sky type character and Bubble Boy, which rules. Think about it. His 3-year run right there, he had Brokeback Mountain, Jarhead, Zodiac. Proof was in that. And he was even coming off, Day After Tomorrow, which not a great film.
I was going to say, if you didn't mention that, I would be upset. Yeah.
Yeah, but still a huge blockbuster that obviously gets him that name recognition there too. That movie made $500 million somehow.
Gyllenhaal was just too much in the shadow of Tobey Maguire and how similar they looked. So it was just tough for him.
It's an insult to Jake Gyllenhaal.
I also want to talk about Jake Gyllenhaal's movies after Zodiac, but we can kind of put the pause on that too. But I do think Gyllenhaal, he really carries the movie, and just watching his kind of breakdown is the most kind of descent into madness out of all three. You can kind of understand the deference of the police officer. Hell, even someone like Downey Jr., who already kind of does play a quote unquote broken, hanging on to his last shred of sanity too. Mm-hmm. But Gyllenhaal is kind of presented as that clean-cut everyman, so unassuming, always on the outskirts, who really becomes that kind of focal point of obsession for Zodiac.
Married to Miss Brown Bunny.
That's a scene.
That was a transformation too, by the way, for just there was amazing makeup in this film all throughout. And I feel like there was so many cases where people just look like they're out of the 1960s, but at the same time just vividly like Gyllenhaal at the end just looks so haggard. There's no way it could have been just
who is the casting director for this film? Because they did a 10 out of 10 job. This cast is top to bottom, not only just A-listers, but also that guys. You see so many people show up. You're like, Brian Cox, you're in this movie? Chloe Sevigny, cool. You're in this movie? June Diane Raphael in her first film role, you're in this movie too?
Well, we named a big one. Let's give him props. Mark Ruffalo killed
Mark Ruffalo. Oh my God, yeah. Ruffalo to superstardom. Donald Logue. Oh my God. That's a great 7-hitter off the bench too. John Carroll Lynch, Hollywood's nice man, basically.
We're going to get into all of them.
Oh, we're going to get into all of them.
Yeah, I got little notes on all of them.
Really quick. We're giving you a perfect transition for the cast.
We have 3 official MCU characters in the film.
Yeah, is this your Avengers, Anton?
Yeah, these are... It would be an interesting film because it would feature 2 heroes and a villain if it was straight up their MCU roles.
It's also true, and technically, Dermot Mulroney plays the president in Secret Invasion, a TV show that no one watched.
That is true.
Yes.
Totally lost at this point.
So any thoughts on the MCU, Pat? Because that's this podcast now. We're not talking about a perfect film anymore.
I have a very important thought that I'd like to bring up to you at the end of this recording.
Sounds good to me.
So, do either of you know who Fincher's second choice for the role of Graysmith was if it wasn't Gyllenhaal?
Friend of the podcast.
Yeah, Orlando Bloom.
Mr. Bloomin' Onion himself.
No.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
No. I mean, again,
that doesn't work.
It's Hollywood royalty at that time. But
too soft.
Absolutely. Legolas could never.
What would that accent have been? Because have you ever heard his attempt at an American accent? It ain't great.
It would be something.
He wouldn't be able to do a San Francisco accent, I'll tell you that.
No. Is Gyllenhaal doing one?
Anton, also define for the listeners what makes a San Francisco accent a San Francisco accent.
Usually it's a lot more casual. People don't actually tune into it too much, but words kind of fall off towards the end. Words meld together, and you get that a bit when you hear certain words like what do you mean versus what do you mean. You get that a little bit in the film. So there is that San Francisco, I guess maybe not accent, but like the San Francisco dialect. Sure.
I don't even know
San
if that's
Francisco listeners, please
feel
call
free
in.
to write in and tell us why we're wrong.
What do you mean?
Yes,
what I
write
mean?
in with your voice.
For as technically brilliant and well told as the film is, we have to talk about the cast, because if Gyllenhaal and Ruffalo's performances don't work, the film doesn't work. They have to carry large parts of the film. I just liked how they were portrayed, especially Ruffalo's character. Is it Tashi or Toski? I think it's Toski, right?
I'm going to Google this one real quick.
Toski.
I think it's Toski.
I think it's Toski.
But he could have been a very cliched character, but I just like how he's just portrayed as a hardworking detective. He's not an alcoholic. He's not trying to do some dumb shit in a movie like you see in a lot of these cop movies where like he's trying to regain custody of his kid or something like that. Nothing like that. No cornball stuff. He's not cutting corners to try to solve the case. Everything about him seems normal except for the animal cracker.
And the bow tie.
Yes.
The one thing I will say too, and they make a point to kind of call it out, is that a lot of these kind of, Charles Bronson, Dirty Harry type police characters are actually modeled off of Dave Toschi too. So he's almost
Bullet.
like the stereotype. Yeah, exactly. He says, I am Bullet, for lack of better words, or they say, or Jake Gyllenhaal says, dude, is that Bullet? Which is hilarious just to think about him calling RDJ dude at that point in time. But I digress, per usual. But yeah, he kind of has to play that understated macho cop because he's playing the character of which those macho cops were based off of. So it's a very layered performance in that regard, that he has to kind of tone it down is almost him toning it up.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really appreciate too is that a lot of people may not realize it, but historic San Francisco, very blue collar town, very gritty. And I feel like this film did a really good job of kind of presenting those characters in that same light and just showing like this is these have to be people very grounded in that reality. So the characters just fit in very naturally in that setting.
I think you also bring up a great point. The movie just feels real in general. Too. I mean, I know that was kind of a big point of Fincher in the production too. He didn't want to make a movie kind of removed from kind of time and reality like Seven, but rather make it actually feel like San Francisco in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and really does succeed in that. And I think, Pat, kind of to your point before about talking about how well cast this movie is, San Francisco is very well cast as San Francisco in this movie too. The fog is so menacing, it's so ominous in the beginning of the movie. Hell, it's the coolest part about the poster, in my personal opinion. So I think even just the setting of San Francisco is kind of a great character itself too.
I have one complaint.
One complaint. Let's hear it.
I think that characters were finding parking way too easily in this film.
That is always my biggest hang up of any movie set in any city. If you're in New York and you're downtown and you find parking in less than like 8 minutes of actual screen time, I'm already taken out of your movie and I hate it.
Just like Jake Gyllenhaal's just pulling up, has a perfect spot to drop off his kid in the beginning of the film. No, there's going to be tons of cars, but
got to queue up.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. You mentioned San Francisco is basically a character in this film. I was just blown away by the lack of technical Academy Award nominations. Like nothing for production design. Like really, it just,
literally rebuilt the Embarcadero Freeway.
Yeah. I don't know.
David Fincher actually built the Transamerica Pyramid with his own hands from the ground up for this film. $15 million extra, yeah, just to build a paper mache Transamerica.
On the DVD commentary, he said, I really like this term, back to the cast. He said he cast Anthony Edwards because, quote, he's like a point guard. He's great at setting everyone around him up, end quote. Really stood out to me when I was listening to the commentary because, like, that's exactly what you want out of a character actor like Anthony Edwards. Because there's nothing particularly interesting about his character. He's just a straight man. He's just Ruffalo's partner.
Did it also stand out because Anthony Edwards is actually a shooting guard?
I gotta stop laughing with my nose, but Anton, you got me on a good snort there.
And then Downey, another one that should have been nominated for an Oscar.
Oh, Downey.
This is
literally
the redemption tour, right? This is part of his I'm Back in Hollywood tour.
Well, we had Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Good Night and Good Luck a couple years before this.
Right.
So now we're really on kind of the upswing over here.
He was on his recovery, for sure. And this is his last pre-Iron Man role.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he'd ever
big
do
deal.
anything like this again.
What are you talking about? He did Doolittle.
I missed that one, Garrett. I have to admit.
What are you talking about? He did The Judge.
I actually like The Judge. I'm not ashamed to admit it.
Ew.
Yeah, not ashamed to admit it.
Doesn't he shit himself in that movie? Sorry,
I don't
if
remember
that's spoilers.
that, but
Okay, now I need to watch The Judge.
Or maybe
Does he?
James Con. Someone poops themselves. I think
Was it Robert Duvall?
I think Robert Duvall.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, Robert Duvall in an Oscar-nominated performance for The Judge, buddy.
And he pooped his pants.
Somehow this film didn't get a nomination.
Would you poop your pants for an Oscar? Yes. Next question.
Yeah, I think I would.
Oh my
yeah.
God, I wouldn't a heartbeat.
It's
Yeah,
called dedication
sure.
to the craft. Thank you.
That's called method acting.
It's called going to work.
It's called going to work.
Downey's chemistry with Gyllenhaal is my favorite thing about this film. All of their scenes together are wonderful. That's why either one of you may have mentioned this earlier. There's no wasted scene in this film. I could see someone making a case for like, do you really need all the dialogue scenes between these two characters? Yeah, you do, because it's great.
I think, in my personal opinion, I want to hear yours too. The two best scenes in this movie are the first bar scene where Gyllenhaal introduces Downey's character to Aquavelvas, because
Yes.
not only is that an exposition dump, but it's also hilarious, also very tense in terms of like the actual subject matter too. And like I mentioned, it's just hilarious watching them get sloshed off of like Sprite and blue curacao, basically. And then secondly, I think, Pat, to your point too about too much talking, too much dialogue, that last diner scene with Gyllenhaal and Ruffalo is just 5 minutes, unbroken, fast talking, new evidence in the case, old evidence in the case, and new patterns too. And it is so riveting, but nothing happens besides words being spoken.
It's incredible.
And I think those are the two best scenes, at least, two best scenes I say in the film, maybe not the most effective, but they're just talking in exposition, basically.
The whole film is exposition. But this is this might be the best example of a film where if you want exposition done right, the whole effing film is exposition. It's just nonstop people talking about different situations. Like, do you recall the scene where Anthony Edwards' character is on the phone with Donald Logue and Elias Koteas in, Napa and Vallejo?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, why weren't we involved in the handwriting? He's like, I'm sorry, I'll telex it to you. Oh, we don't have telex. And it's a lot of exposition. And it's something you're basically covering like 30 minutes worth of story in 3 minutes. And that's why Fincher is so good at how he cuts dialogue.
Right. Because the editing is like done like a music video, which, surprise, surprise, David Fincher's background is in music videos too. But that's funny you mentioned that scene as well, because that's literally just a back and forth of, can you guys get a fax? No, we don't have fax. Also, where's that information? Let me call the other guy. This is basically just like the mundanity of our jobs. But I think that also is a perfect, honestly, summation of this film too. It's like so much of it is us just watching mundane things happen that take so much time and watching the passage of time happening so fast, basically, in the background and foreground too, and nothing really happens. I think that goes back to the point before, Pat. This movie's all exposition. It's just people talking a lot and not getting a lot done over a long passage of time, basically.
Well, I always interpreted scenes like that as a great way to be able to convey like major themes around why the case was unsolvable, especially for the time period, because lack of technology, communication was poor. You can convey that in that scene, and they do it like less than 3 minutes.
Yep. Yet for some people, that's considered too long of a film and just too much exposition. But you really do kind of bring up a really good point too. It's lack of technology, but there's ways to kind of cut around it in film, just let the audience fill in the gaps, but showing kind of how deep these characters are getting into pieces of evidence that may or may not be helpful in kind of the the rabbit holes it sends them down, really kind of highlights the paranoia, the obsession, and just like overall madness and descent into that madness that these characters end up going through. God, I love this movie.
It's so great to talk
right
about.
Now. I'm ready to go
so
find
fun.
the Zodiac.
It's just masterful direction, because all the scenes we were just talking about, if you're reading the script, none of them are particularly special on paper. Pretty mundane. Like the scene at the bar, it's the writing, it's the dialogue, it's the low-key humor. What does he say? He's like, I love to read and I enjoy books. Downey's like, those are the same thing.
No. Okay. The best line you just reminded me of is after the killings at Lake Berryessa, where Zodiac is actually, dressed in black, looking like the real killer, and Robert Downey Jr., Paul Avery, comes up to his desk just to say hi or whatever, and just goes, "Dear God, what is that?" into Jake Gyllenhaal's cartoonish drawing of the Zodiac. Every little aside he gives in the Chronicle office to Gyllenhaal is just 10 out of 10, makes me laugh every time too. And you have to think like a lot of that is probably just Downey just being like, I'm giving you what I got. And Fincher's like, this is why I shoot 87 takes of each scene of mine.
Downey's character has a lot of like just under the radar little comments for random people in the office that you only really catch on the rewatches.
Or when Downey's also on the plane and said, "Mind if I sit with you guys?"
What's another quote he just says about like Jake Gyllenhaal too? He's like, "Methinks our friend's a tad bit fuckered in the head," to basically say that the man has an IQ below 70 in a nicer way.
And he's like, what is he? Or what he takes out the books at the bar and he's like, "You actually carry that around with you?" And he's like, "Why? No reason."
Just again, I'm telling you, Fincher, probably on the 37 take, slaps his knee and then like snaps at him. He's like, "That's why I do what I do." I just
That's
would
how
like
I
to think
direct
that
humor.
Fincher showboats like that.
I didn't really notice this until like the last rewatch, the staggering amount of drugs that Paul Avery is doing throughout the film. Yeah, apparently the film took a lot of liberties with the portrayal of Paul Avery. Apparently him and Graysmith were not even friends in real life, but I'm just grateful for the chemistry that we get between the two actors on screen. So
Yeah, if there were going to be criticisms, the portrayal of Avery was one of them, especially with it seemed like more of a downward spiral than actually his career actually ended up. He actually had a very fruitful career.
downward spiral is the appropriate way to put it because he doesn't end well for him.
Mm-mm.
Downward Spiral is the best Nine Inch Nails album, though. So we have that going for the words Downward Spiral. Thank you.
Speaking of
I'll be
Nine
here
Inch
all
Nails,
night.
they're doing the score for the Neutron film.
Nine Inch Nails, also best friends with David Fincher and scoring a lot of his films too. So
Yeah.
relevant
Yeah,
to this
they're-
episode too.
However, I am grateful they didn't do the score for this because I don't think their style of scoring would work for a period film like this.
Not at all. I think getting that like classic 70s, literally the score of The Conversations composer. Yeah, The Conversation was the temp track score I read during my internet
David
research.
Shire. All the President's
Shire,
Men.
right there. So
Yeah.
I think Fincher was like, why reinvent the wheel when I could just use the same one?
There's too many times where soundtracks in films and scores in films either select from just totally cliche songs or bands like the Mamas and the Papas to feature San Francisco that I just get distracted and
Like Forrest
disengaged.
Gump.
As soon as I hear it, I just get or whenever they play Fortunate Son for the Vietnam War.
Perfect reference.
But in this film, it all felt like genuine. It fit perfectly and just wasn't distracting.
Well,
If it
again,
does.
you could say the soundtrack just really does contribute to kind of like the setting of the scenes too. And Fincher is just always a master of like picking pop songs or just rock songs like of the times too, and making them just like such a non-diegetic like just compliment to like what he's putting on screen in front of us.
Comparison: Super Mario Brothers movie and all of the pop tunes they put in every single scene.
I will say Shut Up and Drive and Wreck-It Ralph, though, is 10 out of 10. And
That's pretty fun.
I will defend that movie to the death. How did we get on to Wreck-It Ralph from Zodiac? I don't know. But let's
Fincher's best work.
stick around, and maybe we'll have even more crazy digressions to other films that are very silly and meant for kids, unlike Zodiac.
Sticking with the cast, we've been mentioning names nonstop here.
Mm-hmm.
Rest of the acting is superb across the board. I don't think there's a weak link. Elias Koteas, Donald Logg, they're great in the supporting roles. Chloe Sevigny doesn't have a lot to do, but I really like her relationship with Graysmith. It didn't feel forced. It just felt like I thought they had good chemistry on screen from the limited time that they get together. They felt like a real couple to me.
It's totally interesting choice. Like, could have really gone with anyone else that also is like a great like actor, but she did fantastic in the role and sold it well, and it was grounded in reality.
And then we have to talk about John Carroll Lynch as Arthur Lee Allen.
Yeah.
That is the other highlight of the film for me, when the three detectives are interviewing him in the break room at the factory where he works.
Mm-hmm.
They do such a good job editing that scene of just all of the cops noticing little things and whether they actually matter or they don't, just how the camera focuses on the cops noticing it, or maybe Arthur Lee Allen's movements with his hands or his body too. It just makes you, the viewer, just sit on edge because you're like, is it this guy? I'm not sure. Does this matter? I'm not sure. So I think that's Fincher really playing with the audience's perception right there too.
Lynch's acting is so good. I've rewatched this scene,
So
I
good.
don't know how many times on YouTube, and he starts off completely harmless. He's like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah, I read about that in the paper." And then this sinister quality just creeps in. He gets oddly like fascinated with their questions, and you can tell he's pretty crafty. But you're like, how smart is this guy? What's his deal? You can tell something's off about him. You're not sure what. Then you learn that he's a child molester later on, which he doesn't even address.
Ugh.
He doesn't acknowledge it when they bring it up. And then he starts talking about some of the craziest shit ever in a film. When oh yeah, I had those bloody knives in my car. It was because I killed a chicken for dinner. It's like they didn't bring this up at all. He volunteers this information. It's insane.
Well, isn't that usually kind of the idea? It's like the people who are most guilty are always the ones who are willing to offer up the most information or be the friendliest as to throw you off their scent. So that's kind of the idea of playing with the viewer's perception that I think Fincher is doing there.
Which cop is it? Is it Kotias? He's completely caught off guard. He's like, oh yeah, we'll look into that. And they like look at each other. They're like, what the fuck? Like,
as Arthur Lee Allen said, I am not the Zodiac, and if I was, I certainly wouldn't tell you. Well, buddy, old boy, you're pretty much telling everything else to make these cops think that.
One thing I noticed, this was on, I don't know, the 20th time I rewatched the scene on YouTube. He claims to be left-handed, but he's wearing the watch on his left hand, which is not impossible, but that would be extremely unusual.
But that goes to the point later in the movie too, where they're talking about,
The writing.
what's his name? That that the Zodiac could be ambidextrous too.
Right.
Therefore, he's right-handed. Wears his watch on the left hand too. A lot of red herrings in that scene is all I'll say.
So many.
Yeah.
The scenes you mentioned earlier, Garrett, are some of my favorites too. I think that one, and we haven't even talked about the murder scenes, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
I want to round out the cast though before we get into some of that stuff. Brian Cox, another actor who's never really given a bad performance. He's great here. Very memorable role as Melvin Belli.
Great heat check in this. Comes in for 10 minutes, does his thing, says see you later to the movie.
Because he's in 2 scenes basically. He's in the scene at the TV station, and then later I think they interview him at his home at Christmas time.
Yeah, but very important scenes, and I mean, master of his craft.
It's one of the rare times where you're okay with Gary Oldman being replaced.
Yeah, I feel like you can kind of cast any one of those like just big name kind of theater actors in there, and you can get away with it, and you can almost do no wrong.
And then the greatest character actor, Philip Baker Hall.
He is one of the best, I think, that guys in the history of cinema. John Carroll Lynch is up there too, honestly.
Oh yeah, he pops up in a lot of stuff, but Baker Hall, man, he's just the perfect role for him.
You know why? Now you kind of got me thinking about this. Philip Baker Hall works as a great complement to the 3 main characters as well, because you also kind of see how he loses his life a little bit later, albeit not due to the same fact as our 3 main characters too. But you can clearly tell that this man is an obsessive, just rabbit hole chaser type person too, always looking to kind of stay relevant, stay in the mix too. And I think you kind of really see a lot of that character's quote unquote folly towards the end of the movie too, where you're like, even all the characters are like, we don't trust this guy anymore. He's off his rocker. He's drunk too. It's just showing that a lot of people who are involved with this case, time has really gotten the best of them, whether it's due to the obsession of the case or their own personal demons too.
And just kind of a fun connection. Of course, we recently talked about our good friend, Mr. Hall, on The Insider. So
yes. Listen to that episode, dear listeners.
Another underrated movie. I think if you're going to pick one nit, there's one thing that sort of bugged me about the film. It's really the only thing. So the guy, Rick Marshall, played by Roger Rabbit, who Graysmith, visits in
Not
his.
Rick Marshall, Bob Vaughn. Bob Vaughn.
Oh, right. Oh, that's right. He was suspecting Rick Marshall or whatever.
Yeah, Rick Marshall was the coworker. Basically, a man we talk about for 30 minutes and never even see that character
Right.
once.
And we get the basement scene, which is I'd say the most pure horror scene of the film, other than maybe the murder sequences. But the basement is that's really Fincher milking the horror right there.
Yes.
But I noticed there's no real explanation for why Graysmith rules Marshall out as a suspect, I don't think. Or after he runs out of that guy's house, right? He's never really brought up again.
I think this is my personal conjecture over here too, is that there was no evidence to suspect Vaughn in the first case. And we're meant to believe that a lot of what is presented to us, the viewer, is due to Jake Gyllenhaal's paranoia. Great example, when he hears the footsteps above the house and he keeps asking, are we alone here? And you hear his internal monologue of it being two men in earlier scenes when he's doing his own research. Is that someone actually there, or is it Jake Gyllenhaal's paranoia too? The entire scene of Gyllenhaal being there, the doors being locked, and Vaughn's like, yeah, it's not a problem. I'll just open it for you, and allows him to leave too. It's would the real Zodiac killer have left him? So I think we can kind of chalk it up to Gyllenhaal's paranoia versus any even circumstantial evidence. That's my conjecture. That's my 2 cents personally. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree though.
I think that makes sense.
Is
Graysmith completely trustworthy?
I think he is kind of an unreliable narrator, and that's kind of who he is really meant to be, kind of the I almost said Cypher, not Cypher. The actual conduit of the audience too. We are living the movie vicariously through him, and then he kind of becomes a quote unquote unreliable narrator towards that last 40 minutes, because we're not sure if this is actual real evidence, anything real and substantial for the investigation, or if this man is just losing it, like we've already seen happen to a lot of other characters, namely Paul Avery.
I mean, this is also just another really great example of the storytelling, kind of more just around this telling the message of going down the rabbit hole of investigating these murders that come out very fruitless. And as you kind of continue to go into the deep underbelly of, society, you find that it's much darker. And at the same time, as it kind of scurries into the darkness, we get answers that go on, or we get questions that go unanswered. And as they say, we stare into the abyss, and the abyss stares back at you.
Good one. The Roger rabbit hole.
Nice.
Next reason is a question. Is this Fincher's best film?
Is that a question posed to us, or did you have more to follow up on that? Wasn't sure if that was rhetorical.
It is, but I'll answer it first. I think it is. For my money, I think this is his best film. It's not his most entertaining. I think on a technical level, it's the best thing he's ever done.
I think I gotta agree. I want to say Social Network, but that's just the easy kind of cop-out answer. And even though I think Social Network is probably my favorite movie of the 2010s, I think Zodiac's got to be his best movie.
Yeah, it's so hard. I'd say this Social Network is one of the best character pieces I've ever seen, but this is more art than Social Network was. So I think that I agree with you, Pat. It's a very strong statement, but yeah, this could arguably be Fincher's best film.
Like I said, not his most entertaining,
but transformative, attention to detail. How do you tell a proper story around something that didn't even really have a proper ending?
Right. I think he does the best job with it. It's a slow burn. Mm-hmm. It can be ponderous at times, but that's deliberate. It's like reading a book on screen. That's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, I always like to talk about how one of the things I love about horror films is the ability to kind of work with all of the different facets of film to kind of create magic. And I feel like Fincher really showed us that, even with the Lake Berryessa scenes.
Yeah.
Where you're just caught off guard, where a couple is, of course, just sitting by the lake, and you just see this goofy character kind of standing behind the tree. Honestly, the first time you watch it, you could kind of think this is actually kind of hilarious. And then slowly the reality of the situation creeps up. And with that, we're really, as an audience, able to kind of feel the terror of the people at the time, and really what was the horror of the Zodiac killer.
Anton, you bring up a great point too. I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but what it almost sounds like to you, you're saying is that it's so terrifying because of how random and circumstantial it all is. There really is no pattern to everything. Like we talked about it earlier. We only know 5 confirmed Zodiac kills, but for all we know, there could be that much more, 2 or so many kills claiming to be that. And I think the randomness and just sudden shock of all of these murders, especially the Lake Berryessa scene, like I think about that scene like once a week and I just get like chills down my spine, honestly, too. But just how so sudden, how random, how just haphazardly done and how messy it's done just really shows that there's really no plan to this all. It's very nihilistic in that regard too, very cynical, very cold, which let's be honest, are hallmarks of David Fincher. And I think in a lesser director's hands, like that could be played cheap, that could be played as a terrible jump scare. But in Fincher's hands, they're just so tense, they feel real, and that makes it almost that much more scarier too. So Anton, I don't want to bastardize your points by any means too, but that's kind of how I read what you were saying a lot of.
No, I loved where you took it, and I just wanted to add as well, it's because the film is so grounded in reality that the audience can take a moment to not only feel terrified of what they're seeing on screen, but it also kind of forces us to reflect on the society that we live in. This is a stupid commentary on just, of course, the desensitization of just what we see in the media and how killings just kind of become almost like, well, we're just seeing the headline news. But you see 2 deaths on screen that are just so terrifying because it's also grounded in reality, and we kind of see it very like straight up in the scene without any I guess no filter. So I feel like once you have that presented upon you with a film, it's either accept the reality of what we live in and kind of the story that Fincher is trying to tell, or we can kind of pretend like this didn't happen, which I'm sure a lot of people would rather it didn't.
That sequence at Lake Berryessa and the opening with the couple in the car, I think more effective than most horror movies. You know what's going to happen. Fincher drags it out. And the fact that it really happened, like you were both talking about, makes it only that much more horrifying. I think those 2 things on a pure technical level are the best work Fincher's ever done. It's riveting filmmaking. And it's hard to watch. It really is. It's unsettling when you see, Anton, to your point, like the guy in the hood is goofy looking, but when you see him disappear behind the tree and then the girl's like, oh wait, he's gone, and you're just like, oh man.
Oh no.
Because if you put yourself in that couple's shoes, you're like, oh well, there's people around, and then there's nobody else around. They're in the middle of nowhere.
I was watching some of the behind the scenes too of like what they did to kind of just make Lake Berryessa look like it did back then, and they didn't have to do much. I probably visited at least once, but even that, and kind of along the same lines of like why I love San Francisco films is there's so much rich history, and it's just fascinating to see like what's happened there, and also terrifying to see what's happened there.
That's why I wanted to cover this around Halloween. This is, I think, a great film to do for spooky season. It's probably my favorite thriller of all time, because I'd classify this as a thriller.
I think it's definitely a mystery / thriller film. If you had to put in like some genre,
yeah, I think it's my favorite one. It's a fantastic slow burn.
It's definitely. I think it might be my top San Francisco film of all time.
What are other top San Francisco films? Quick, like rattle off like a top 3 or 5 right here.
Milk, Mrs. Doubtfire, Princess Diaries, Vertigo, Bullet,
Towering Inferno. Just kidding.
Godzilla 2014. Just kidding.
Obviously, I mean, I'm gonna stand by this. View to a Kill.
The Matrix Resurrections.
And then another film just because it shows a lot of San Francisco that doesn't make it on screen. Last Black Man of San Francisco.
Great movie. Jonathan Majors, you suck, but that's a great movie.
Yeah.
I'm kind of disappointed Garen didn't say Hulk.
No, but I will say 48 Hours.
Yep, it's another one.
48 Hours
Invasion
is a great
of the
one.
Body Snatchers, one of my all-time favorites. Donald Sutherland.
Yeah.
Dirty Harry. Very Zodiac-y right there. Inspired by Zodiac, too.
You know what's
The Game. Duh. Fincher.
The Game.
The Game.
The Pursuit of Happiness is not on that list.
No.
It was.
I didn't even know that was set in San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's set up Will Smith's asshole, actually. Sorry, I'm cursing a lot on this episode.
It's okay.
I apologize if you lose any sponsors.
How many great movies has Will Smith been in?
Independence Day.
Men in Black?
Men in Black, yeah.
Men in Black is great.
Bad Boys 1?
Bad Boys. Scenes of Bad Boys, too. After Earth.
I'm trying to remember the one where he was wearing American Eagle the whole film.
Anyway, Zodiac is the best San Francisco film, in my personal opinion. It's definitely the most terrifying San Francisco film.
Yeah.
It's so unsettling.
It really just, it really gets under your skin so well.
I love the fact that he used All the President's Men as a template for this. It's such an interesting decision, and I think it's the right one. If you approach this like a horror movie, like Seven, I think it would have sensationalized the material in a way that wouldn't have been good. This is like a procedural, right? That's what works about it. It's like he wanted to say it's like a newspaper movie, and like, yeah, that makes total sense.
Anton made the best point before where the fact that it feels so real is what makes it so terrifying too. Like you can see this happening in your life, in your town. And I think that's what makes it scarier, how little we know and how much the evidence is pretty much all a red herring, because obviously the case is still open to this day in 2024. That's what makes it so scary to me, not the fact that it was presented with jump scares, slashers, things like that.
I want to come back to another one of Anton's points too. Anton, you're just making them.
Anton, fuego,
San Francisco film, bringing it out of me.
You mentioned how the film does an excellent job of showing how the odds were very much against them in terms of solving this, with the bureaucracy and the different jurisdictions that weren't really cooperating. That works really well for the runtime of this film because, building off your point, the film does such a great job of showing the longer things go unsolved, and Downey's character even says this, the more the public begins to forget and the more people's memories begin to fade. And you really get the sense by the end of the film, Graysmith is the only person who seems to care about this. He's just alone on an island trying to solve this thing. Even Tosky, he's like, he's willing to act on some information that Graysmith gives him, but he comes pretty close to shooting him when Graysmith's knocking on his door at like 1 a.m. or whatever time it is.
Also, underrated funny scene in that movie too, where June Diane Raphael goes, "Is that Graysmith?" And he's like, "I'm gonna get my gun. I'm gonna kill him."
Yeah, I'm gonna
just
kill
like it's just such a great line reading by Ruffalo there. But Pat, you actually bring up a really good point too, talking about the evidence and how Graysmith really is kind of the only one who's really kind of going on to this as he slowly slips into sanity. Even when he presents all of this evidence, which, as they talk about in this scene, as circumstantial, you can see Tosky kind of have the look of like, all right, give me a little bit. Actually, wait, pull back. Actually, give me a little bit more of that. Pull back. I shouldn't be doing this. He has the attitude of someone who says, I shouldn't be doing this when they're about to make a terrible decision in the club, to be honest with you. That is like a man who is like, I have a wife back at home. I shouldn't be doing this. And he literally does have a wife back home in this example too.
What do we think of the way Fincher shot this?
Gorgeous.
I love you, David Fincher.
Harris Savitas, same DP as The Game, incidentally.
San Francisco movie.
Yep.
Yeah. There's an art to being able to film scenes at nighttime in the dark and still being able to accentuate the right things, proper lighting during the night scenes to still kind of create that mood of spookiness, but at the same time, like not make it feel like it's just really dark outside and you can't really see anything.
You know what's really interesting, and I want to get your guys' take on this. Do you think like Fincher is almost the yin to Michael Mann's yang in terms of realness? Like Michael Mann is literally like, I want all of this to look like this could happen outside your window. I will shoot at night. I will not shoot until I have a camera that can shoot on night, which is, in my personal opinion, why some scenes of like Collateral look like pretty terrible or you can't really see them because
there's motion blur and stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Versus someone like David Fincher who's like, that shot's impossible and I know it's impossible. Therefore, I will spend $10 million in 10 months on trying to recreate this shot digitally, but make it look as real as possible and then stitch it in seamlessly into what's actually on film too. Like, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, they're very yin yang with each other in terms of how they approach getting realism on film.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. They both embraced digital film in different ways.
Exactly. I think Fincher kind of goes more for like that cutting edge, like wet, like Weta, like Lucasfilm, like almost like type of technology. He's like, let me create the impossible with this. Whereas Michael Mann is like, I will build a Ferrari factory and I will kill 9 people, including some children, which I know he didn't do in Ferrari. But let's be honest, if Michael Mann could, he probably would.
Yeah, I've often wondered, especially on the last film, the last Fincher film that I saw, The Killer. where I think, Anton, if you remember, one of the things I mentioned on that episode was this film is so perfectly filmed, it almost feels too perfect.
Right. He is the king of slick, Fincher.
It's like a sterile. But this film, I think he did the digital cinematography right, where you can tell that this is shot digitally in some shots, but this also has almost a film grain to it. I like the color palette used here. It's pretty muted, a lot of blues, a lot of grays, a lot of browns.
It's like
I just love how he filmed this.
It was a really good example to me of just looks gorgeous, looks pretty, but doesn't necessarily look perfect, if that's a great way to put it, like, or if that's an okay way to put it, because I kind of think of even maybe in the example of like stock imagery, you can immediately tell when something's a stock image when it's a bit too doctored or it just looks too perfect. And I feel like you can have a really beautiful shot, but if it looks inauthentic, then that of course translates to the viewing experience.
I'm trying to think. Does David Fincher love rain more than he loves his own children?
Does he have children? I don't know anything about his personal life.
He has one child.
Okay.
David Fincher, if you're listening, do you love rain in your films more than you love your child?
I don't want to say he's like Kubrick in that regard, because he's not, but like he is one of those filmmakers where I literally know nothing about his personal life. Not that I would want to, but I feel like over the years I know a bit about Spielberg's personal life. I know a bit about Scorsese. You know what I mean? I don't know anything about Fincher.
Yeah,
he was married to Linda Fiorentino's sister. I know that. Why do I know that? I don't know. I just remember that fact.
His wife is a producer, right? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so I knew that one thing.
Who produces basically all of his movies, which is kind of fun.
Right. Yeah, that's a nice relationship.
It is a really nice relationship, just like Downey's wife too. Love duos that work together.
Yeah, just the way he shot this back to that. There's at least a dozen shots in this where I paused it just to look at it because it was so nice.
That brings me to like one other point too. Speaking of how Fincher shoots thing, he just has a masterful sense of like set and setting in place itself. You never feel lost in a Fincher movie, if that makes sense.
No.
So you talked about Panic Room before, his last movie 5 years before it. Basically a single location movie, and it's inside a house. And I feel like any movie, especially in one locations or inside a house, you need to know every nook and cranny, where every door is, where every stairwell is. And Fincher does such a masterful job of like getting those establishing shots. Not only that, but also his crazy digital shots of like bringing you through the floors digitally. And I feel like he employs a lot of those techniques similarly in Zodiac. I talked about with the overhead shot of the cab before too. A lot of overhead shots of San Francisco in general. Obviously going through almost CGI montages of San Francisco being built. You never feel lost in this movie, even though you probably have how many different time jumps? 40, 50, something around that number.
What do we call this?
Chirons?
Spatial geography.
Spatial geography.
Yeah,
I was
he's a
like,
master.
oh yes.
I love.
I thought you were asking me what do you call
geography.
the little things that say San Francisco 1969? I was like, chirons. That's the word I'm looking for.
Well, we've talked about it
geography.
before.
Yes.
Like distance. San Francisco itself is not very big, so being
and he
able
makes such a good job of it feeling small and intimate. Sorry, that was the other point I wanted to bring up.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. I got excited by that.
But then at the same time, we already, with our spatial geography and knowing of the setting, we can tell what scenes are set in San Francisco when they travel and get outside of there. And it's a very different tone when you see the shots outside, whether it's in Vallejo, other parts of the Bay Area, you know when it's not San Francisco. So just that's not easy to do, especially when you have a lot of your establishing shots in San Francisco.
Well said. Very well said.
Very subtle use of CGI. He uses CGI to enhance the film rather than dominate it. Anton, you've brought this up to me a bunch of times, but that essentially what amounts to a helicopter shot of San Francisco Bay, and we're moving in on the city, and you see the Embarcadero Freeway, which obviously no longer exists. I didn't realize that until much later. That is a entirely CG shot.
It's just beautiful. Yeah.
If David Fincher wanted to stop shooting movies and only be a consultant of establishing shots of cities to make sure they're geographically accurate to the time in which they're filmed, I would be wholly on board with like that decision for him.
I just want another film in San Francisco just to get a chance to recreate Candlestick Park, and I'll be a very, very happy boy.
Tell Fincher you want a movie made about the late 80s, early 90s 49ers teams.
Or
you go.
just do a film about the 89 Loma Prieta earthquake.
Boom. Honestly, Fincher doing a natural disaster film. Now you got me excited.
You could base
was
it
the
around the World Series.
World Series, the A's versus the Giants.
Boom.
Didn't
You already
the Giants
got the
get
30.
smoked?
The Giants get smoked.
Yeah.
They did get smoked during that one too. Oh my God, that's a perfect.
Yeah,
Oh my
there you
God,
go. Yeah.
that's great. Boom. Historical disaster.
David,
Yeah.
if you're
Terror.
listening,
Get out of World War Z 2. We don't want it.
Mm-mm.
Make this movie that we just pitched.
I even read he helicoptered trees into the Lake Berryessa location. Like that is nuts.
He would not be good for the planet Arrakis. He would just be like flying trees in there to water them. They're like, David, we don't have any water. Stop it.
We can't use them, David. Sorry.
David, we don't need the oak trees. We can fix it in post. He's like, oh, I'll show you how to fix it in post. All
Fly
right.
it in.
Does anyone know what he's doing next? Because I don't.
World War Z 2. I'm not joking.
I don't love it.
I mean, I'll see it.
Do you think it's the classic one for them, basically?
I suppose. Wait, World War Z 2?
Is he still doing that? I think that was his like next announced thing, but that was like
mean,
a few years ago.
He's been connected
Is
to a bunch of interesting stuff throughout the years.
Is it still
Yeah.
Brad Pitt's character?
Ugh, God.
The
Just
movie
make
stunk.
Mindhunter. Just do Mindhunter season 3.
That'd be pretty sweet.
He's totally out on that, I heard.
Yeah, I don't blame him.
Oh, and Anton, as a Bay Area native, I know you'll appreciate this because I know this from my many trips to San Francisco. When they visit Riverside,
Mm-hmm.
did you notice one of the local cops asked him, "Oh, you're from Frisco?" And Toski corrects him. He's like, "No, San Francisco," because I know
It's so
nobody from the Bay Area calls it that.
we either call it, of course, you're going to the city.
Right.
You're going to SF is acceptable. I know you're not from there if you say San Fran, Frisco.
Yeah.
And no Californian's going to say it to your face, but it's weird if you say Cali.
I hate that. Don't say that.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I'm doing a little research over here. I'm not seeing any World War Z 2 things here, but what I am seeing is, this was from 6 months ago. I don't know if you guys remember when this was announced, that apparently David Fincher was, quote, quietly working on an American version of Squid Game for Netflix.
That'd be interesting.
What's wrong with the Korean version?
No one said anything was wrong.
Okay, all right.
What are you saying is wrong, huh, Pat?
I'm not saying anything's wrong. He is. I think he's under contract with Netflix for at least one more film.
I think the same concept of do we really need like another adaptation of Squid Game to did I really need another Old Boy? Like, did I need an Old Boy adaptation by Spike Lee?
That is one of the
We really
all-time
didn't.
worst movies.
We really didn't.
Okay. In a more fun hypothetical, though, what's a better movie? David Fincher's version of Michael Mann's Collateral or Michael Mann's version of David Fincher's Zodiac?
Ooh.
I feel like those are the easiest swappable ones of their movies to me.
I think David Fincher's version of Collateral I would prefer.
I would like to see Michael Mann's Benjamin Button.
Michael Mann's Benjamin Button is a movie I would be opening night for. That'd be
That'd
hilarious.
be wild.
Pat, are you getting excited over the thought of Michael Mann's Benjamin Button now?
I'm just trying to wrap my head around how awful that would be. He would shoot it digitally, which is awful for a period piece. Like that Public Enemies movie he made. It's like, why is this shot digitally?
He would shoot it digitally. It would just be Brad Pitt getting consistently angrier and younger throughout the movie of just his like follies of being a man who can't look outside of himself.
I feel like Michael Mann, he's used CGI, but it's like I just can't picture Michael Mann using special effects.
So the answer is David Fincher's Collateral.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That would honestly be a sick movie. David Fincher, if you want to remake a movie,
I'd watch it.
I'd watch it.
Next thing, I just love seeing the old school Paramount and Warner Brothers logos. Nice
Super
touch.
cool.
Yeah.
Love that.
Always hits nice.
Yeah. Last reason, I don't know how long this needs to be. The Zodiac discussion. There's more than one way to lose your life to a killer. Great tagline for the film.
Yep.
If any of you have thoughts about the actual Zodiac killer, now is the time.
Well, I've already established that Anton is the Zodiac, but that was thoroughly debunked earlier in this episode. So Anton,
He
I'll
wasn't
defer to you.
alive, so
Right, yeah. So thoroughly debunked.
Man, I think there was some pretty big evidence that I think was unearthed on Reddit. If I remember, there was a really big Reddit thread around like evidence that was released on the Zodiac killer that kind of moved it more towards like not the Lee individual, but I forget which individual that the evidence pointed towards. But at the end of the day, I kind of feel like this is kind of there's still nowhere really near knowing who it was.
I mean, the tough thing is we don't know if it was one Zodiac killer, if it was multiple people working in conjunction. We don't know if it was just multiple people all claiming to be the same individual, therefore kind of, juicing the counts of the Zodiac killer's kills as well. And I think that's what's a very frustrating thing about the general discourse of the Zodiac killer too. But that's why I think this movie does such a good job. The movie is not about the killer at all. It's about kind of that descent into madness for all of the characters and kind of those involved in the case itself. And to me, that's a much more interesting and honestly finite story than kind of the wild goose chase of a killer that most likely we'll never find in our lifetimes or ever, if they even existed.
I mean, the real life Robert Graysmith, it was interesting for me to read that there was a lot of criticisms about his work. Like after everything's been published, everything that he's gone through, people have gone back and say there's a lot of inaccuracies.
Yeah.
And also the movie makes a point to say that David Toschi, basically wrote the letters as Zodiac to the paper to kind of draw him out too. Was he actually trying to draw the killer out, or maybe was he trying to draw some more attention to himself and kind of boost his profile? There is kind of a lot of that discourse too, of how much of this work was actually done to find the killer or to find the killer versus it being self-serving and kind of get people on the map and noticed and get some notoriety too.
Yeah, I think the main thing about this film, which is worth pointing out, is that there are other numerous theories about Zodiac killer. This film is primarily Robert Graysmith's interpretation. As you pointed out, Anton, he is not without his critics. There are plenty of holes in his theory. I am far from an expert on this. I've done a little bit of reading on it, but his theory pointing to Arthur Lee Allen as the killer, we should state, I think, there is evidence that indicates Allen was not, in fact, the killer, but someone else altogether. There are, Garret, you mentioned theories about there being more than one killer. We just don't know.
I was going to say, I remember reading around that same fact that while there's not circumstantial evidence that tied Allen to being the killer for particular cases, there was no evidence that counted out that he wasn't a killer. So kind of still supports like the multiple killer theory.
Anton, these knives are just bloodied because I killed chickens for dinner. Okay,
that is wild. That's just he really said that to them too. Like he did.
Amazing.
It's just unbelievable.
I listened to some of the tapes, like from real life, and you can understand why they were like, "Yeah, this man mentally didn't have it all there." And,
they're like, "We should leave this room."
Yeah, it was kind of like, "Oh yeah, his IQ is definitely below the levels of a normal adult."
And look, while some of that evidence against them may have been circumstantial, holy cow, is it damning.
But I guess that's the worst part. It's all circumstantial too. Like they kind of even make it a point, like towards the end, they have mountains of evidence. What? The windbreakers, the gloves, the boots, the knives, the guns, the most dangerous game, the watch. It's all could be dismissed as circumstantial if you don't have fingerprints, handwriting, et cetera, too. That's America for you people.
Yeah, if we really wanted to go into our own rabbit hole, this would be a much more different podcast. That there's a lot of podcasts that cover
plenty
of killers.
Better true crime podcasts than this one for sure.
Yes, we making up crimes.
Where are you guys on true crime? You guys like it?
No.
Yeah, same. That's so funny. I'm not a big true crime guy.
All right, let's wrap this up.
We
talked about the marketing. It's not an unorthodox. It's an unorthodox movie. We talked about the cast. We discussed, is this Fincher's best film? We agreed that it was, and a little Zodiac discussion. So giving our ratings, Garret, as the guest, would you like to go first?
Oh, I would happily go first. I don't think this is going to come as a shock to anybody, but I'm giving this movie a straight A. Honestly, there's really nothing to kind of criticize, in my opinion, about this film. My biggest criticism is that it wasn't longer, honestly, and that Fincher felt the need to make every character talk so fast just to basically hit his studio notes, too. But honestly, I think the movie does a great job focusing on kind of the characters researching the Zodiac rather than kind of taking that well-worn trope of following the killer itself, or focusing on kind of the murder, the hysteria, and just kind of the actual effects of the killers, but rather showing the effect the killer has on the subjects that are actively trying to pursue or investigate them. So all in all, just watching people's descent into madness, 10 out of 10. Jake Gyllenhaal, I feel like this was his real big kind of coming out party. Pun not intended because of Brokeback Mountain. Also really cements RDJ on his comeback too. And also just establishes Ruffalo as a real A-lister too. He was obviously on the come up too in the mid 2000s, but I think this is another film that really just kind of catapulted into another level of stardom too. And again, I talked about before, but you have a murderer's row. Again, pun not intended. I'm not trying to do this, of character actors in this film that really just make it all work together and sing. And again, it's David Fincher. The guy's a master at his craft. And I think it's really fully on display and realized with Zodiac too.
So why isn't it an A plus?
Honestly, because nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect in this world. And if it was, then we'd have nothing greater to
You
strive
can
for.
give it an A plus, even if you don't think it's perfect.
Fine. I'll give it an A plus that scored it at 99. Is that okay?
All right.
Can I do that? Can I do
Thank
that?
you.
Can I give
I feel better
99
about this
A
now.
plus?
Okay.
That's fine.
This, for me, is a stone cold classic. It is such a complete film. It is a slow burn, but I don't find any parts of it slow. It is a film that requires multiple watches. This is not something you should just watch once. You have to see it a couple times to really absorb everything that it's throwing at you. Fincher put so much thought and planning into every little detail. This is one of those films, the more I watch it, the more I like it. I've probably seen this all the way through 10 times. It's not something I could watch all the time. You have to be in a mood for it, for sure. But I do think this film is perfectly filmed and edited. Maybe not everything in the film itself is perfect. Again, that's subjective, of course. But technically, this is one of the most perfect movies I've ever seen. It is a war crime that this did not get Academy Awards attention. The acting is brilliant across the board. There's no weak link there. I love the writing. I love the score. We didn't really talk much about the score. Very moody, very effective. This is an S tier movie for me. One of the best films I've ever seen. I have it about on the same level as All the President's Men. I really do hold it in that high regard. It's up there for me with like Chinatown, Silence of the Lambs. Probably my favorite thriller of all time. I think it's David Fincher's finest contribution to cinema. It's aging like wine. History will only be kinder to this masterpiece. This is as emphatic as an A plus as I can give a film.
Very nice. The word meticulous comes to mind when I think of this film, and so much detail from top to bottom, and there's really not enough that can be said about how difficult it is to be able to create a film grounded in reality that's set in the 60s. So you have to actually pull the audience into time travel and still believe that you're grounded in reality and not in some foreign, far off place. So I feel like just with that transformative just superpower that Fincher has to be able to take his audiences, whether it's in 90s San Francisco to 1960s San Francisco, we have different examples where I feel like it really does take a master to be able to take an unconventional story or an unconventional way of storytelling and still create a masterpiece that captivates over the course of 3 hours. So I'm right there with you guys. It's for me, it is like the highest S tier that I can put this film. I think that it is why I don't love like the A through F. I don't love the A through F scale because like A plus kind of almost limits like how great this film is. But you know, Pat, I agree with you. A plus, S tier. This is just an amazing film.
It's an absolute love fest. Not every episode can be like this, but we had a pretty similar love fest with The Insider.
Yeah, because these movies deserve it. I think those two movies are a great kind of double feature. Like they work pretty well as companion pieces, honestly. Like The Obsession of Man.
The procedural aspect of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good
I
call
love
out.
a good procedural. Honestly,
Yeah.
like people also just being like, okay, Less so much this, because we can't really say people are good or competent at their jobs because we technically haven't caught Zodiac. But I just love watching movies about people doing work skillfully and competently. So I think that's maybe why I love movies like The Insider and this. I don't know. Is that like a genre? But you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
like
Spotlight. That's
like
a good example.
Like Chef.
Chef. Yeah, exactly. I don't care what your job is. When you do it well, big fan.
Silver
You know
Linings Playbook.
Spotlight's another one where the more I see that, the more I think it's like pretty damn close to a perfect film.
Spotlight and Zodiac, great companion double feature.
Yeah, they're similar movies.
Yeah, they make you feel awful about yourself. You got Ruffalo.
Yeah.
What else?
Great Ruffalo. Great Tucci.
I love the Tooch.
Yeah. My wife and
Next film I'm doing on this
fans of
podcast,
his,
I want a
reality
Tucci. Give me a Tucci film for the next one.
Tucci?
Yeah, give me a Tucci. There's a Transformers with him.
Jesus.
Yeah, see? Why wasn't it better? Exactly. Boom. There you go.
Oh, man.
Let's do the Julia Childs film.
The Julia Childs film.
He's in a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he's the Tooch.
Anton, what have we covered with Tucci in it? Pelican Brief?
Pelican Brief.
Yeah.
That's good. Ish.
Captain America First Avenger.
That's right.
That might be it. Yeah, we need some more Tucci. Okay. We're doing The Lovely Bones at some point. That's a wild Tucci
That
performance.
is crazy Tucci
Ooh,
performance.
I got a terrible one for you. The Terminal with Tom Hanks. There you go.
Where he plays a bad guy, but I think like he redeems himself.
You mean a Customs and Border Protection like commissioner doing their job?
Ugh.
Yeah.
That is the most boring Spielberg movie.
See? Yeah, let's not do that. That's boring.
I mean, it's I don't know if it's the worst Spielberg film, but it's the most boring.
I have a soft spot for that film, but again,
It's
that's
fine.
personal
It's
bias.
just if you're gonna watch a Spielberg movie, like you're not picking that one.
Well, it also is just a movie of its time. Like the whole concept of he survived by putting the luggage carts back into like the luggage cart like holders, and like you'd get change for each one that you put back. So you can't really do that, I think, in airports anymore.
No, probably not.
It was also the only film that ever made me really want Burger King.
Huh.
The last time I had Burger King, I got food poisoning. So I'm good.
I don't even remember the last time I had Burger King. It was probably the 2000s.
They had the best cross-promotional like film toys, though.
Burger King had way better toys than McDonald's. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, like the Pokemon
you know what? That's
gold
I
bars. They
think
were just
you're
giving
right.
away gold bars back in the day.
I think you're right.
Honestly, like my parents are like, this is cheaper to buy you a Happy Meal and get you the toy than like a new Pokemon game or something like that at Toys R Us.
You're like, fair enough.
Yeah, fair. Sell to kids. I'm all for that. Yes, this podcast is now about how to sell toys to children.
Toyetic.
You make sure that you find a TV series that you can dub quickly and only film a little bit, but then make sure that there's a great toy line, or the Saban film strategy.
And now we need to find if Stanley Tucci was in any of those films, so I can do that as an episode of.
Get back to me about a Tucci film you want to cover.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Tooch later.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Tooch later. My wife and I are big fans of his CNN series that got canceled, but has now been revived.
So good.
The travel one?
Yeah, Searching for Italy. Great series.
Searching for Italy. Big fan.
Okay, well, that is it for Zodiac. Garrett, always a pleasure. We're going to have you back later this season.
This side of the microphone. Thank you.
It's on both sides, my friend.
Yeah. I hope next time that, Garrett, that we grab lunch, that we'll have Pat there too. So
I'll be there.
Guys, just saying, if you ever do a live episode, I will come to wherever we need to
I keep pushing for a Vegas episode.
Eventually,
I will happily do it.
I hope we have the audience to do it. I really do.
We should do a Vegas episode and record it at 2 a.m. Do one at 2 p.m. and do another episode at 2 a.m. and see how wildly different they are.
I don't even remember. The last time
Pat's
I
eyes just lit up.
I was like, oh no. Okay.
That would be so fun.
Yeah, we'll make it work.
Oh, I'll make it work and then some.
Alrighty. That's it for Zodiac. And next week, it's the 20th anniversary of The Village.
Oh, no.
Have fun.
We will.
Have fun with that steaming pile of whatever it was.
Yeah, well, we'll be there. All right. Take care, everyone.